Incoming! Hold the line! The captain! Incoming! Get down!
In August 1914, as the First World War erupted, France entered the conflict with a powerful belief that national spirit, the doctrine of offensive warfare, and the courage of its soldiers would be enough to repel the age-old enemy across the Rhine. The bitter memory of the 1870 defeat in the Franco-Prussian War still weighed heavily on the nation's consciousness, and the desire for revenge had shaped French military thinking for decades. In that atmosphere, Paris marched to war not only to defend its territory, but also to restore lost honor and reaffirm its status as a continental power. The French General Staff placed absolute confidence in Plan 17, a doctrine emphasizing the offensive and viewing the will and bravery of the infantry as the decisive factors for victory. According to this plan, French armies would quickly advance into Alsace and Lorraine, driving German forces out of the territories lost in 1871. Meanwhile, the threat from the north, through neutral Belgium, although warned of by some officers, was not regarded as the primary axis of attack. This conviction fueled French confidence, but it also concealed deadly risks. Germany, by contrast, implemented the Schlieffen Plan, a bold, cold strategy meant to avoid a prolonged two-front war. Under this plan, the bulk of German forces would mass on the right wing, sweep through Belgium and northern France, defeat the French army in a lightning campaign, and only then turn east to confront Russia. Violating neutral Belgium was not merely a military decision, but a politically perilous move that would bring Britain into the war. Still, for Berlin, speed and decisiveness were considered the keys to rapid victory. In the opening weeks of the war, German armies advanced into Belgium with overwhelming strength, smashing defensive lines and rapidly overcoming the initial resistance of the Belgian army. Reports of occupied cities and columns of German troops pushing relentlessly southward spread through France like a chilling wind. Even so, French headquarters remained convinced that their armies on the eastern frontier would achieve a decisive victory, forcing Germany to divert forces away from its northern drive. The reality unfolding on the battlefield was about to prove that this belief gravely underestimated the scale and speed of the German offensive. In northern France and southern Belgium, the Charleroi region became the point where opposing strategic currents collided. Situated along the Sambre River, Charleroi was an important industrial hub with dense networks of bridges, railways, and urban infrastructure. Militarily, the area held a vital position in controlling the routes leading from Belgium into the French interior. For the Germans, breaking through at Charleroi meant opening the gateway to Paris. For the French, holding the Sambre line was essential to stopping the enemy's advance. France's Fifth Army, commanded by General Charles Lanrezac, deployed along the Sambre with the mission of halting the German forces moving down from the north. Lanrezac was a cautious commander with a far more realistic understanding of the threat posed by the German right wing than many of his contemporaries. He recognized that the French were facing a numerically superior and highly organized enemy, yet his warnings did not always receive full support from high command in Paris, where the offensive spirit continued to dominate strategic thinking. Meanwhile, Germany committed its Second Army under General Karl von Bülow and its Third Army under General Max von Hausen to the push toward the Sambre, aiming to shatter the French defensive line and maintain the momentum of the southward advance. These two armies formed a critical element of the German right wing, combining infantry, artillery, and meticulously prepared logistics. They marched with iron discipline and relentless tempo, leaving behind landscapes already scarred by war. As the Battle of Charleroi approached, tension gripped both sides. For French soldiers, this was the moment to defend the homeland's frontier against an oncoming wave of invasion, where national honor was tied to every yard of ground along the Sambre. For German soldiers, Charleroi was just one stage in the long march toward Paris, but also the place where they would meet the first major determined resistance from a large French force. In this charged atmosphere, as the bridges across the Sambre became vital strategic targets and industrial cities braced for fire and destruction, history quietly gathered its force before erupting into one of the fiercest battles of the opening phase of the First World War, a moment when France would soon tremble before the relentless advance of the German army. Entering the Battle of Charleroi in mid-August 1914, the two opposing armies embodied two military doctrines, two ways of waging war and two entirely different states of mind. On one side stood the French army, sustained by an almost absolute faith in the moral strength and offensive doctrine of Plan 17. On the other stood the German army, forged in iron discipline and operating like a modern war machine, guided by clear strategic objectives and meticulous preparation. The confrontation at Charleroi was not merely a clash of forces, it was a harsh test of the military thinking of both nations. On the French side, the main force engaged was the Fifth Army, one of France's key formations during the opening phase of the First World War. It was commanded by General Charles Lanrezac, a staff-trained officer known for his sharp analytical mind and cautious assessment of battlefield realities. Under his command were more than 250,000 soldiers organized into multiple infantry, cavalry, and artillery corps spread along the Sambre River and the surrounding Charleroi region. The French units were equipped with the Lebel 1886 rifle, highly accurate and with long effective range, and the famed 75mm field gun, the pride of the French army. The French 75 boasted rapid fire, high mobility, and was considered a symbol of French technical prowess. Yet despite these strengths, the French suffered a severe shortage of heavy artillery and machine guns compared to the Germans, a weakness that would become painfully apparent in large-scale engagements. In terms of organization and doctrine, the Fifth Army was deeply influenced by the ethos of attaque à outrance, attack to the utmost. French infantry were trained to believe that élan, courage, and fighting spirit could compensate for any shortfall in firepower. Their bright blue and red uniforms, symbolic yet impractical, remained in use, making them conspicuous targets on the modern battlefield. Although Lanrezac fully understood these vulnerabilities and repeatedly warned of the true strength of the German right wing, he remained constrained by orders from the High Command in Paris, where General Joseph Joffre held supreme authority and maintained unwavering faith in the offensive spirit. French defensive preparations at Charleroi were temporary and incomplete. The Sambre River was designated as the main defensive line, but fortifications, fire positions, and bridge preparations for a prolonged defense were insufficient. Many French units were deployed along the river in a posture more suited to launching counterattacks than holding ground, operating under the assumption that they would soon seize the initiative and move forward. This assumption left the Fifth Army exposed to the risk of being overwhelmed once the Germans began large, coordinated assaults. Facing them, the German army deployed a formidable concentration of forces from the right wing of the Schlieffen Plan. Directly opposing the French at Charleroi were the Second Army under General Karl von Bülow and the Third Army commanded by General Max von Hausen. Together, these two armies fielded more than 300,000 troops with tightly integrated organization, efficient logistics, and synchronized cooperation between combat arms. Karl von Bülow was an experienced commander, respected for his ability to coordinate forces on a large scale. His Second Army formed the central spearhead of the German right wing, tasked with smashing the French line along the Sambre and opening the route deeper into France. Hausen's Third Army, advancing on Bülow's right flank, was assigned to support and widen the front, continuously pressuring the French army's exposed wing. The Germans entered the battle with far more thorough and realistic operational preparation. Their infantry carried the Mauser-Gewehr 98 rifle, supported by a high density of Maxim MG-08 machine guns, and backed by a diverse artillery arm that included both field guns and heavy howitzers. German heavy artillery, though not present at Charleroi in the overwhelming numbers seen during the reduction of Belgian fortresses, still provided a decisive firepower advantage over the French defensive lines. Tight coordination between artillery and infantry allowed the Germans to advance methodically, minimizing casualties while maintaining relentless pressure. In logistics and command, the Germans held a clear edge. Pre-war planning and an extensive railway network ensured rapid and steady troop movements. Their hierarchical yet flexible command structure empowered lower-level officers to make tactical decisions within the broader strategic framework. German reconnaissance, using cavalry and forward detachments, operated effectively, providing headquarters with a relatively accurate picture of French deployments. The contrast in preparation was equally visible in each side's approach to the battle. The Germans viewed Charleroi as an obstacle that needed to be overcome swiftly but systematically. They did not rush into poorly prepared assaults. Every attack was designed to break apart segments of the French line, leveraging superior firepower and numbers. The French, though possessing high morale and determination, were forced into the difficult position of simultaneously defending and remaining ready to counterattack. Despite facing disadvantages in both firepower and battlefield conditions. As the two massive armies completed their deployments along the Sambre, the atmosphere before the battle grew heavy and tense. French soldiers stood along the riverbank, gazing northward at the rising dust and smoke that signaled the enemy's approach, torn between determination and dread. German soldiers marching through the towns and villages of Belgium and France understood that they were about to enter a major battle, one in which the resistance of the French army would be tested with ferocity. All these elements converged, turning Charleroi into the ignition point for one of the most decisive clashes of the war's opening phase. A place where every form of preparation, whether driven by faith or forged in iron discipline, would soon be tested in the inferno of modern warfare. On the morning of August 21st, 1914, as a thin mist still hung over the Sambre River and the dense industrial zones around Charleroi, the opening phase of the battle began in earnest. It was not an immediate explosive clash, but rather a steady escalation. Hour by hour, day by day, as two massive armies pressed against one another in a confined landscape where rivers, bridges, and industrial towns became vital tactical anchors. For the French, this was the moment they were forced to shift from a temporary defensive deployment to a direct confrontation with the powerful German right wing. France's Fifth Army, commanded by General Charles Lanrezac, was spread along the Sambre from Namur to Charleroi and farther west. French units occupied riverbanks, bridges, and nearby settlements with the mission of stopping or at least slowing the German advance. Yet this deployment was overstretched and lacked defensive depth, reflecting a mindset still oriented toward counterattack rather than prolonged resistance. Many French formations had not yet constructed solid fortifications, and communication between corps remained limited. On the German side, General Karl von Bülow's Second Army approached the Sambre from the north, while General Max von Hausen's Third Army advanced on its right, forming a strategic pincer. From the earliest hours, the Germans did not rush to storm the river with their full force. Instead, they conducted reconnaissance, artillery bombardments, and probing attacks to identify weak points in the French lines. German artillery quickly gained the upper hand, directing organized fire against French positions along the riverbanks and within urban districts. The first clashes erupted around the bridges crossing the Sambre, structures whose tactical value far exceeded their physical size. The French fought to hold them in order to preserve mobility and the ability to launch counterattacks, whereas the Germans sought either to seize or destroy these key positions to clear the way for their crossings. Infantry on both sides collided in narrow streets, factories, and warehouses where visibility was limited and machine gun fire proved devastating. Gunfire echoed off brick and steel, turning once bustling industrial centers into blood-soaked battlegrounds. In the early days, the French launched several local counterattacks in line with the spirit of Plan 17. Infantry units, dressed in their striking blue and red uniforms, charged across open ground near the river, convinced that speed and courage would drive the enemy back. But these assaults quickly ran into well-coordinated German machine gun and artillery fire. Many French units suffered heavy losses within minutes and were forced to retreat in disarray to their starting positions. For French frontline soldiers, the opening phase of Charleroi became a painful collision between idealism and reality. They entered combat with the resolve to die for their homeland, only to discover that modern warfare no longer resembled the heroic bayonet charges imagined in pre-war doctrine. Shells fell without warning, machine guns tore through tight formations, and every step forward demanded lives. The brutality of the fighting began to erode morale, even if their will to resist had not yet collapsed. Meanwhile, the Germans advanced with measured precision. Their units crossed the river piecemeal under close artillery support, quickly expanding bridgeheads. Rather than launching massive frontal assaults, German troops used dispersed formations and exploited the cover offered by industrial and urban terrain, gradually pushing the French from their initial defensive positions. Every gain was promptly reinforced, forming a chain of mutually supporting footholds along the river. A significant factor during this stage was the still incomplete coordination between the French and the British Expeditionary Force on the western flank. Although the Fifth Army and the BEF shared broad strategic objectives, communication and operational cooperation remained limited. This left Lanrezac at risk of being isolated should the Germans intensify pressure. Aware of the danger, he began considering adjustments to his deployment, choices that ran counter to the offensive mindset favored by French high command. Between August 21st and 22nd, the intensity of combat rose sharply. German artillery continuously pounded French positions, disrupting command and supply systems. Though many French units managed to hold their lines, signs of strain became increasingly apparent. The lack of heavy artillery made effective counter-battery fire nearly impossible, while ammunition stockpiles and supply routes came under growing pressure. Across the Sambre front, the momentum gradually shifted toward the Germans, even though no decisive breakthrough had yet occurred. Thus, the opening stage of the Battle of Charleroi became a brutal test of strength. The Germans measured their ability to dismantle French defenses through firepower and disciplined organization, while the French were forced to confront the limits of their offensive doctrine in the face of industrialized warfare. Neither side achieved a conclusive victory in these early days, but the first clear signs had emerged. The Germans were gaining the initiative, and the French were beginning to feel the crushing weight of the war machine descending from the north. From this foundation, the battle would soon surge into its climactic phase, a phase of ferocity and tragedy beyond anything the soldiers on either side could yet imagine. As the Battle of Charleroi entered its climax on August 22nd and 23rd, 1914, the entire northern front of France was engulfed in a storm of fire unlike anything seen since the war began. The initial probing skirmishes quickly gave way to full-scale engagements, drawing hundreds of thousands of soldiers from both sides into a deadly vortex of artillery barrages, machine gun fire, and infantry assaults. Along the Sambre River, from Namur to Charleroi and farther west, the battlefield transformed into a long strip of hell, where every bridge and every industrial neighborhood was contested at horrific cost. On the German side, General Karl von Bülow resolved to unleash the full strength of his Second Army in a decisive offensive. The bridgeheads secured in previous days now served as launch pads for large-scale river crossings. Behind them, dense concentrations of German artillery opened relentless fire on the French defensive lines, clearing the way for advancing infantry. Heavy shell after heavy shell crashed into French positions, collapsing makeshift fortifications, obliterating civilian districts, and severing communication between units. The battlefield soundscape became a terrifying blend of thunderous detonations, clashing metal, and the screams of men fighting desperately for survival. General Max von Hausen's Third Army, attacking from the southeast, increased pressure on the French right flank. The coordination between the two German armies formed a tightening vice, forcing the French Fifth Army to stretch its resources thin across the entire front. For General Lanrezac, the situation was growing dire. He not only faced overwhelming pressure from the north, but also the threat of being flanked and cut off from his allied partners to the west. At the height of the battle, the bridges over the Sambre became the scenes of the bloodiest fighting. The French struggled to hold or destroy them to hinder the German advance, while German troops attempted daring crossings under a deadly hail of fire. German infantry advanced in small groups, using smoke and urban cover to reach the southern bank. Once across, they swiftly deployed machine guns and light artillery to secure the bridgeheads. Many positions changed hands multiple times in a single day, leaving the ground littered with bodies and shattered equipment. Loyal to the offensive ethos, French forces repeatedly counterattacked in hopes of pushing the Germans back across the river. These assaults were launched under crushing firepower, with German artillery dominating the field. French infantry surged forward across exposed terrain, only to be cut down in rows by German machine guns. Individual bravery could not compensate for the lack of firepower and fortifications. In many units, officers fell within minutes, leaving disoriented and grieving soldiers to fend for themselves amid the chaos. The crescendo of Charleroi laid bare the fatal weaknesses of French military doctrine. The brightly colored uniforms made soldiers easy targets in an age of rapid-fire weapons. The shortage of heavy artillery prevented the French from suppressing German machine gun nests or disrupting their improvised defensive lines. Meanwhile, the Germans advanced methodically, dismantling French positions piece by piece through concentrated fire and coordinated infantry movement. For soldiers on both sides, the battle's climax became an unbroken stretch of life and death struggle. Many French troops, facing combat for the first time, were confronted with the brutal truth of modern warfare, where survival could be decided by a single burst of gunfire. They fought in desperation, clinging to shallow trenches, basements, and ruined factories, fighting off attacks and waiting anxiously for orders, all while fearing encirclement. German soldiers, although holding the initiative, also paid heavily for each river crossing and each advance through the perilous urban terrain. Every meter gained cost blood, and advancing units were continually thinned by French fire. By August 23rd, the pressure on the French Fifth Army had reached a breaking point. Defensive lines along the Sambre were pierced in multiple places. Units were losing contact with one another, and the threat of complete encirclement loomed large. Confronting this grim reality, Lanrezac understood that persisting in the offensive spirit demanded by high command would mean annihilation. In this moment, he made a painful but necessary decision: to prepare for an organized withdrawal to preserve the army. Thus, the most violent stage of the Battle of Charleroi was defined not only by the sheer intensity of fire and staggering casualties, but also by a decisive strategic turning point. It was the moment when blind offensive zeal gave way to the bitter clarity of modern war. The blood-soaked days along the Sambre shattered the French army's early war illusions and marked the beginning of a new phase, one in which France was forced to face head-on the terrifying power of the German war machine sweeping southward with unstoppable force. As the Battle of Charleroi drew to its close on August 24, 1914, the landscape along the entire Sambre River revealed a scene of devastation and gloom, a stark reflection of the ferocity that had consumed the front in the preceding days. France's Fifth Army, after resisting under increasingly unfavorable conditions, was finally forced to withdraw from positions it had defended with blood and determination. This retreat was not a total collapse, but it bore the heavy imprint of tactical and psychological defeat, marking a painful turning point for France in the opening weeks of the First World War. Militarily, the outcome at Charleroi tilted decisively in favor of the German Empire. General Karl von Bülow's Second Army and General Max von Hausen's Third Army succeeded in breaking the French defensive line along the Sambre, compelling the French to retreat to avoid encirclement and destruction. The capture of Charleroi and several key river crossings flung open the door to the French interior, allowing the right wing of the Schlieffen Plan to maintain its rapid advance. For the German High Command, Charleroi was a significant operational victory, one that validated mobile warfare, concentrated firepower, and a tightly coordinated command structure. France's Fifth Army, under General Charles Lanrezac, carried out its withdrawal under extraordinarily difficult circumstances. Pursued relentlessly by German forces, French units were forced into grueling marches, exhausted, sleep-deprived, and constantly on alert for renewed contact. Yet thanks to Lanrezac's caution and decisiveness, the retreat did not devolve into a catastrophic rout. The core formations remained intact, avoiding encirclement or annihilation, outcomes that would have been far more disastrous than the defeat at Charleroi itself. Casualty figures from the battle revealed the brutality of the fighting compressed into just a few days. The French suffered especially heavy losses, with tens of thousands killed, wounded, or missing. Many regiments were reduced to fragments in the span of a single day. Charges against superior firepower, combined with the shortage of heavy artillery and inadequate defensive works, resulted in staggering casualties. For many units, Charleroi became a haunting memory from the very first days of the war. The Germans also incurred significant losses, particularly during the river crossings and brutal urban combat. Thousands of German soldiers fell while storming bridges, riverbanks, and industrial districts fiercely defended by French troops. Yet unlike the French, German losses occurred within the context of a campaign moving in their favor. Efficient logistics and manpower reserves allowed German armies to reorganize quickly and sustain momentum, maintaining relentless pressure on the retreating enemy. Psychologically and politically, the defeat at Charleroi jolted France. Confidence in Plan 17 and the doctrine of attack à outrance was shaken to its core. The illusion that victory could be achieved through sheer offensive spirit was shattered by the grinding realities of modern battle. Anxiety spread within both the army and the civilian population as news of successive withdrawals in the north reached the home front. Even Paris, still distant from the fighting, began to feel the mounting threat of the German advance. For the French High Command, Charleroi forced a reckoning with the bitter truths of industrial warfare. In the days that followed, strategic adjustments began to surface. The importance of artillery, fortifications, and defense in depth was reconsidered. Although change did not occur overnight and faced considerable resistance, it was at Charleroi that the seeds of France's eventual military reorganization were sown, a transformation that would continue throughout the war. For Germany, victory at Charleroi reinforced confidence that the Schlieffen Plan was unfolding as intended. German commanders believed that the French army had been decisively beaten in the initial engagements, and that the fall of Paris was now only a matter of time. Yet this triumph also masked early signs of strain within German ranks, as units were pushed to march and fight continuously along an ever-lengthening front. Still, in late August 1914, a powerful sense of imminent victory dominated German strategic thinking. In its historical context, Charleroi was an inseparable component of the broader battles of the frontiers, in which the French army suffered severe setbacks against German organization and firepower. The defeat directly contributed to the Great Retreat of French and British forces, stretching from the Belgian-French border all the way to the Marne. It was during this retreat that the conditions for the decisive Battle of the Marne emerged, an event that would alter the entire course of the war on the Western Front. Seen through the lens of history, Charleroi was not merely a French defeat or a German tactical victory. It was a moment in which the true cruelty of modern warfare revealed itself, where individual bravery could no longer prevail against industrial firepower and large-scale military systems. Along the banks of the Sambre, the lives of tens of thousands were swept into an unstoppable vortex, leaving deep scars on the French national memory and etching Charleroi into history as a grim warning about the real cost of war in the 20th century. The Battle of Charleroi in 1914 ended in fire and a painful retreat, yet its echoes resonated long after in the history of the First World War. Along the banks of the Sambre, where factories and neighborhoods were torn apart by artillery fire, observers witnessed not only a military defeat, but also the collapse of the early illusions of a swift and glorious war. Charleroi forced France to confront the harsh reality of modern conflict, while paving the way for even greater events soon to unfold. How do you feel about the Battle of Charleroi and those tragic, heroic days? What lingers with you the most? The relentless offensive spirit of the French soldier, or the cold, disciplined efficiency of the German war machine? If you found this story to offer a meaningful, emotional perspective on history, please consider giving it a like, subscribing, and following us as we continue exploring the decisive battles that shaped the fate of Europe and the world during the First World War.